Hi, Earl.
Hello,
How you doing?
I am doing well. How about yourself?
Really good. You can kick us off whenever you're ready. Maybe just another minute or so, just to wait till 5, and then I'll just leave you unmuted. So just go ahead and start when you're ready.
Okay. Okay, that puts us right at about 5 o'clock. And as always, I like to be mindful of people's time for those of who started and as well as for our guest speaker. But my name is Earl Airy. I am one of the facilitators of the MOD MPOD Alumni Association, and welcome to our alumni webcast. Today, we have with us Loretta Randolph from MOD 6, who has a background in healthcare. Many of you who are aware of healthcare and may work in the healthcare field know that it represents nearly 20% of our GDP and seventh across a lot of developed countries in health status. And even if you're not in the healthcare field, I'm sure that there are a lot of MPOD and MOD like tools that you'll take away from this that you'll be able to take back to your organization and be able to use in some way, shape, or form. So you're in for, again, you're in for a treat. You're always in for a treat when you sign into one of these. But to give you a bit of a background about Loretta, she is currently recently retired principal healthcare organizational strategist for the MITRE Corporation in Washington, D.C. Brings over 30 years of experience as a healthcare leader and consultant in organizational assessment and design, stakeholder engagement, change management, business transformation, and communications. Recognized as an expert with appreciative inquiry and consensus building, strategic planning for sustainability, results-based leadership development, project management, instructional design as well to round that out. Loretta has successfully designed and implemented innovative design and change strategies that enhance organizational and benefits business effectiveness in government, public, and private healthcare organizations in 10 countries. She also has published and presented nationally and internationally on business transformation and strategy on different change strategies. So without further ado, it gives me a great pride and privilege to introduce to you Loretta Randolph.
Thank you, Earl. Good afternoon, everyone. You know, that introduction makes me feel really old. Every time you start throwing words around like 30 years experience, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, am I really that old? And when you say I've retired, have I really retired? That hasn't quite sunk in yet. As Earl said, although the title of this presentation is American Healthcare Reform, it's really about the opportunity I was given with no holds and no restrictions on doing some very amazing organization development work in the federal government at extremely high levels in one of the biggest agencies in the system. I know some of you are familiar with the story, so I hope it's not too repetitive. but there is some new information that I think people will find interesting as well. So again, this is really about being given the opportunity to do really good OD work and have some national impact in doing so. This afternoon, I'd like to set the context for you a little bit, and then talk about the design challenges and opportunities in this project, the approach we decided on, and then looking at, because this work is all about engaging groups in high performance, what is the model that I developed in order to do that? Then spend some time reflecting on what made us so successful, the impact we had, what we learned, and then finally opening it up to everybody on the call for discussion. So just to give you some context, the MITRE Corporation is a national and actually international systems engineering company that runs federally funded research and development centers. Federally funded research and development centers were created after World War II because the federal government didn't have enough research scientists. And so they created these organizations that were non-governmental, private organizations funded by Congress to help look at the biggest challenges the government was facing. The difference between an FFRDC and consulting firms you might be familiar with, once something is developed by MITRE, or once something is got to the point where another consulting firm can do it, we step out. We're only involved in those big challenges with the government that really have to either be prototyped or worked on prior to other work. As I said, we address some of the toughest problems. If you've ever flown on an airplane or used GPS, then you've benefited from some of the technologies that were rooted in a MITRE FFRDC. The technical questions are approached with a high degree of objectivity, but this bottom last bullet, and really the reason I went to MITRE, is I was intrigued because they embed OD consultants on all of their technical teams. So for all of the technical work is doing, whether it's for the Department of Defense, for the justice system, or in my case, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, there are 8 OD consultants actively working with the technical subject matter experts on project teams. The as I said, both in the write-up and for this webinar, I did this work at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, and I'm not going to read the slide, but these are some staggering figures about healthcare in the United States and the role it plays, how big the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid are, the numbers of people that regularly receive financial benefit from Medicare and Medicaid. So we're talking about a massive system of systems that touches virtually every other person in the country in one way or another. So this is the context of the organization that I was working in. A specific part of that organization that commissioned this work was the part of the organization that controls all of the quality of care initiatives and programs. So any of the things that you see when you visit your physician or visit a hospital around the quality of care, around satisfaction, any of those things, have their legislative and policy home in the center that I was working in. Okay, so design opportunities and challenge. We had been working in this system for several years, had very successfully done a $3 billion annual program transformation, all based on, it was a complex interdisciplinary transformation, but it was grounded and designed around good, solid organization design principles. So basically we were asked by a senior federal official, said, you know, we have a lot of groups in this agency who informally get together and talk to one another, but we would like you to bring these groups together to help break down stovepipes in the agency and help change how we do business. So think about this. They come to the OD consultant and they say, we want you to help the federal government change how we do business. So that's all they said. And oh, by the way, we want to not only break down stovepipes, we want to make sure that we're able to implement the goals that CMS has around quality and other topics. No other requirements were given. So basically, I was given a blank page to look at and do what I thought would be most effective. Some of the challenges and opportunities that were presented is the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare is a highly stovepipe organization historically. Basically, an insurance company was merged with a public health organization. They were sort of merged together, and that is now what we have as the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. So we have policy people who really don't interact much with the finance people, even though they might be working in the same area. As I said, it's a complex system of systems affecting large numbers of stakeholders across the country. We have varying power dynamics because we have the traditional organizational structure within the agency. We also have providers and facilities and beneficiaries and governments and all of those different stakeholder groups with varying levels of power. There's also varying needs. A Medicaid program, which is basically run by individual states, it has to be accountable to CMS, presents a different problem than a program that's run directly out of the agency, and it's geographically dispersed. The agency is dispersed across the entire country. So the approach we took in looking at what we knew about the agency and the information we were given, we had to start thinking about things like, well, what kind of groups do we want? What do they want them to be? This is more than for those of you that are familiar with the federal government, oftentimes there will be federal work groups. Federal work groups basically are people that come together to do a task and disperse. What the government was asking us for was something very different. They wanted to bring like-minded people together to work on the toughest problems for the agency, but then not disband, to evolve that work into something else. So when I started looking at it, there are some things that immediately came to mind about how we can do that. My consulting practice has been grounded and based on AI for the past 30 years. So for me, it was only natural that everything we would do would be from an appreciative inquiry perspective. We also felt it was important that we intentionally design these groups in a way that they could be self-determining and self-directing. It was not people coming in and telling these groups how to behave, but that they would determine that themselves. So the intentional design is very important. We also wanted to have our role not be one of an expert consultant coming in and telling the government what to do, but rather take more of a process consultation approach, where we partnered with the sponsors and shoulder to shoulder, we co-created the groups in the future that they wanted. And then it was important to make sure that we MITRE had the right team to bring this together. So again, it was a blank slate. All we heard from the government was, right now we know about 3 groups, so we would just like to have as many as we can have. Well, that's pretty hard to do a cost estimate when somebody says we want to do as many as we can have. So what we did is we created an approach and a plan that would say, okay, for X amount of dollars, we will do X up to 15 groups. So from the beginning, we started designing for 15 disparate groups that would be active, meeting every other week. And on the off weeks, they would, the champions or the people that ran the group for CMS would be coached by the MITRE team. So that's why, and we'll talk about this a little bit about why the core team development is an important part of this model. And all of this work was done within the environment of those principles that would be guiding the work. So when I talk about intentional design, I already mentioned that we wanted the groups to be self-determining and self-organizing, because we felt, and the literature backed us up, in that when people are involved in the change or in the work, they have more ownership. It was really important that all of the groups provided a focused multidisciplinary collaboration forum. As I said, the organization was very stovepipe, and we had experts, national experts all over the agency working on similar things but maybe never engaging with one another. So we wanted to assure that we could leverage the diverse strengths across integrate efforts and all in service to enhancing the health quality programs of the agency. Excuse me. So the way we approached it and the design we used is we wanted to make sure that while we had some consistencies across all of the groups, that we wanted to work cohesively with the individual groups and gain their collective commitment, and then proactively engage and involve stakeholders as needed. So if you can imagine the groups starting out with just being CMS, but if it warranted, they could reach out to other HHS agencies, other federal agencies. And the ultimate goal is to have the beneficiaries and providers involved in this work. And we've done that with a few of the groups over the past couple of years. But making sure that whatever the groups did, the appropriate stakeholders were involved, and that the process would be a continuous one of broadening and deepening connections. And the bottom line also, this is not bringing together groups of people to have interesting conversations. The bottom line really was to produce impactful outcomes, demonstrate value, and help achieve agency goals. And in a few slides, I'll give you some examples of how that happened. So how are we going to do this with a team of MITRE subject matter experts and what is now, as of today, 11 active groups? So there was a champion suggested by CMS leadership, which would be somebody in the agency who would be the de facto lead. We then have a team of currently 9 MITRE subject matter expert consultants who partner with those champions to design the group activities and help with the meetings, in addition to other things which I'll talk about. The kinds of skills, the very last bullet, is really, how do you find someone who understands group behavior, facilitation, coaching, critical thinking, relationship development, and oh, by the way, is also a subject matter expert in healthcare. How are you going to do that, Loretta? Well, I did. I was able to find an amazing group of people who, if they didn't have all of this, they had much of it, or they were very naturally inclined to do this kind of activity. So why process consultation? As I mentioned, it is because of when Shine wrote about process consultation, what he had in mind. And it really is that we don't go in and create change in organizations. We don't go in and be the change agent, but we go in and partner with those people who are the real change agents. And this very much was an approach that is what I heard the agency wanting in my initial discussions with them about their vision of successful groups. And so that's why we decided on process consultation. And the keys that I've outlined here: partnership, mutual responsibility, increased capacity for learning, and fitting with the organizational needs, to me was really what they were calling us to do. Sorry. And why AI? If you think about this particular AI model, and you think about a federal agency, and particularly a federal agency that is providing means for healthcare, you would have to be very much in a state of looking at what they're doing and then combining and amplifying strengths across the agency, and then ultimately turning that energy to the world to help elevate the organization. And so this, again, when I listened to what the executive's vision was, to me this made sense that if these groups were to in fact do what they were hoped to do, that in putting an AI approach in all the work that we did would be most beneficial. And so you say, well, how do you do that? Virtually all of the work that we did, whether we were starting a group or before we even started groups, and we did initial interviews with they proposed champions. It was all done with an AI approach, and in some cases, a pretty classic AI interview was the tool that we used for doing a lot of our initial data collection, and then in the groups as well. Why core development? As I said, there's currently a team of 9 subject matter experts. They come from varying backgrounds. On the team, I was the only person trained in OD, and then my protege, who has now taken over the work, is in the American University Master's Program. But the other members of the team are registered nurses, public health experts, communication experts. When I was interviewing for team members, while we weren't so much looking for did they have the right experience and credentials, it's what we heard in the interview. Did people understand what relationship building was about? Did the people understand when we said self-determining? Did they understand what that meant? So we put together a group of people to work on the MITRE side that came from various backgrounds. But then we also said it's not enough to just bring the people on and do the work, that we have to have regular ongoing professional development, not only in our subject matter, but also in group behavior facilitation, coaching, critical thinking, and relationship building. And this was done for a couple of reasons. One of the main reasons was that if we were learning together, then our approaches could be much more consistent. And if we were learning to speak a similar language, then when our government sponsors talk to any one of us, that they would be hearing similar approaches. Okay. And so this is what we did. As I said, we designed a structure to accommodate 15 groups. We provided thought partnering, coaching. We customized support for every single group, but we standardized things across groups. For example, the only real requirement we had from the government is that each group must be chartered. And a charter in the federal landscape is what is the group being intended to do? What is the membership? What are their success indicators? Who is sanctioning them? Who are their executive sponsors? So we did that for every group. We also thought it was important, since MITRE is so involved in this work across the entire agency, that we also have MITRE subject matter experts in the groups, in addition to government employees, to provide that extra layer of subject matter expertise. We continually monitor the internal and external environment to make sure that the work that the group was doing was either breaking new ground or advancing things that had already been started. We would regularly conduct ad hoc research, and I'll give you some examples of how that, what that resulted in. And we also leveraged the MITRE teams that were working across the agency to help communicate through the groups. And for example, the executives came to us and said, MITRE, you know more across the entire agency than we do. Can you help us connect the dots? And so we very much became dot connectors for the government. And then this last bullet is, we were asked in a couple of cases, I think it was 3 cases, could we regularly convene our subject matter experts at MITRE to work in parallel? So we had, if you take public health, for example, we had public health subject matter experts meeting at CMS, and then on the MITRE side, we had MITRE's public health subject matter experts meeting as well, and helping to inform the work of the CMS affinity group. So we were integrating as much as possible. When we started to look at how the groups develop, we started developing a model of not only what we were seeing, but what was actually our thinking of what was successful. And we continually looked at the people, the processes they were using, and the outcomes, and developed this model where, the groups would come together, everybody would make the assumption that they knew everything about what everybody else was doing, and they quickly found out they did not. So the groups, every one of them moved into a phase that we called enlightenment. And that's where they started learning and educating each other about their work. Once they were able to do that, they had a common understanding and a common language, they could move into action. And that took all different appearances based on the work they were doing. And then once an initial action or some action was completed, they moved into a reflecting mode, and then finally a realigning. All of it with the intention of being what impact is their work having on the agency and its work. And groups would move up and down this model. Some groups stayed in enlightening for a much longer time than they went to acting. Some groups kind of never got out of acting because what they were doing was so complex that they never were able to sit back and reflect. And what we also noticed is that the more engaged agency leadership was, and we did have representation in the groups from every level of agency leadership, the more engaged leadership was, and the higher participation and collaboration. This was not, the work in these groups was not in anybody's position description. It became a very high visibility group. Not the current, but the former CMS administrator called it his group of his private think tanks. That he knew when the agency had a very big problem, that he had a group of subject matter experts in an environment that he could bring that to. An example of that is actually, I think, two years ago, when the HHS, the White House told HHS agencies that they must come together and create an approach to the opioid crisis in this country. And the CMS administrator came to the affinity group, the behavioral health affinity group, and said, we need this done, and we need you to collaborate with the National Institutes of Health and the Centers for Disease Control to do this. So not only were we kind of the point person for CMS, but we then became the point person for those three agencies coming together to work on this issue for HHS. So this model is one that we validated many times through the group of the work and is still holding. So reflections on success. So what is it that we did that made this such successful work and continues to be very successful, that it's highly profiled publicly and within the agency and within HHS? And so when I asked our team, when we were about a year and a half or so into this work, what is it I want you to articulate to me why you think we're successful? And they talked about it in the context of their curiosity, passion, and empathy, that they helped co-create high-performing teams, and they had these three principles. But the team members really do have autonomy, and they're talking about the affinity group members as well as the MITRE. This is the MITRE team, but they're talking about it in relation to the affinity groups. They have the autonomy in decision making. They were self-directed and self-managed, while I was there as their manager, if you will. It was really their guidance that I took about what was best for their groups. There's a high degree of shared ownership and accountability. There was never an issue of someone not feeling that they had help from a teammate. There were special projects that they were given that might be out of their domain that helped enrich their experience and deepen their understanding, and that innovation and creativity is the norm. So this is, as we reflected on, what was it about this group of people that came together to do this work that was successful? This is what they articulated. This is a graphic that they put together as they were struggling with, as many people do, what are our core values? As they talked about the work and the successes that they had with the affinity groups and how they were feeling about their careers in MITRE, these are the values that they came up with when we did the value study. And just to point out, this team ranged in age from someone who was just finishing her master's in public health and was in her mid-late 20s to myself and everything in between. So we had a full range of early career, mid-career, late career employees working on this work. So that's just a little bit about the team. And so what impact did we have? At MITRE, the impact we saw that we were really giving our employees the skills and the expertise to work collaboratively and uniform team. More importantly, we were giving them skills that typical consultants, particularly in a technical environment, don't get. And that's really around, if I learn these skills, are they transferable to other federal agencies and other projects? And they were. And so what did this do for CMS? The affinity groups were able to model successful relationships and with partners outside of the CMS. When we were doing the opioid work, it was the first time that CDC, NIH, and CMS had ever come together to talk about a common problem. And think about that, all of the overlaps of those three agencies, yet they didn't talk to one another. That if you build a strong partnership, you will create an environment for high performance. And finally, that by promoting innovative thinking, we were able to demonstrate value and impact of the groups. So this very recently, we were challenged with, okay, what impact and value are the affinity groups giving? And this was as we looked at the work that we were doing. If you look at the graphic, the step graphic, if you will, a lot of the activities we did in addition to running groups is, well, we did research and we did analysis, and from that a strategy was developed. From that strategy, artifacts were developed, and from the artifacts, we were able to share knowledge and manage knowledge. So this list is an example of strategies, documents that were put together. Now remember, all of these are at the national level. So we were successfully created a strategy for healthcare quality for CMS, a second version and a third version. Value-based purchasing, which is changing the way how physicians are reimbursed for services, really didn't have a lexicon that people could understand about the work, and so one of our teams created that. CMS didn't have a handle on all of the learning and diffusion activities they had and how they intersected. And CMS pays a lot of people a lot of money to do learning and diffusing of technical assistance. We created a strategy for person and family engagement and for nursing homes. So all of these documents, and I won't read the rest of the list, but all of these documents are strategies that were then taken by the agency and brought to implementation. We also did things like create e-news, so all the different groups knew what the others were doing, but more importantly, all of the 9,000 employees at CMS knew what the groups were doing well. And finally, in specific groups, we also did created mechanisms for communication, and that's what that last bullet is. So, given all this work, we learned some things, and myself in doing this work, we learned some things in that how important partnership is, and if you really continually strengthen and deepen partnership, the results you can have. I was very humbled at my retirement party in December at MITRE. The officials from CMS came over, and they said things similar to what my MITRE colleagues said, and I was kind of taken back. And what they talked about was partnership. And one of the executives said, is when Loretta partners with you, she partners with you. No, she really partners with you, meaning that we were shoulder to shoulder with them. The second thing I was learning was the importance of inquiry. That all of our work started with inquiry and questions being asked, and how all of that, the subsequent work was driven by those first questions that we asked. The importance of hearing our voices, federal and intentionally as champions were selected for the groups. They didn't have organizational chart authority, and that was done intentionally because our government sponsor wanted to show people that there was a possibility for them to have power and influence in a way that they might not ever have, and that their voice did matter. The importance of time. And while, you know, people say, well, it would be just much easier if we just stood up these groups, told them what to do, gave them assignments, and had the work completed. Yeah, might have been quicker, but it would not have been as impactful. And then finally, the last learning is the importance of continuous wonderment, learning, and curiosity. We need to be able, as practitioners, to help our clients, our sponsors, not lose that wonderment and possibility. That to always have a hope, because they're setting writing major policy that's affecting everyone in our country, and in some cases other countries as well. So they can't be boxed in. They have to be allowed to continually wonder and look at what's possible. And that's my story. So I'd like to now open it up to questions, comments, reactions for the next few minutes. Anyone?
Hi everyone, Kylie here. If you guys want to put questions, comments, reactions into the chat box, and we can look at them from there. Loretta, if you go out of your screen sharing, you'll be able to see the chat box as well.
Okay, thanks.
There is a question here. Can you give some examples of the affinity groups?
Sure. You mean the subject matter? Yes. There was the original one is work that I did with a group of senior executives on creating the CMS quality strategy. So these are folks who came together and said, we want to create this strategy ourselves. We don't want consultants to come in and write it. So that was the first one. We also had a group in behavioral health, population health, learning and diffusion, nursing homes, post-acute care, palliative care, Alzheimer's and dementia. And I'm sure there are a couple I'm missing, but that's the range of groups that were active. I was talking to the person who took over for me yesterday, and they're wanting to stand up 3 more groups. Now, I don't know what those are, but we had a lot of discussion for those of you that are in healthcare and know healthcare. Well, we should have a patient safety group. And our belief, as well as CMS's belief, is no, patient safety should be part of everything we do. It's not a separate discussion. A big discussion around data analytics. Should we have a group that really looks at all of the data that is coming into the agency, and are we using it effectively to run our program? So those are the kinds of groups that we had.
Another question related to that, how did you assess and measure which stage in the group maturity model each group was in?
By observation. And I didn't use it in this presentation, but at a point in time, I have the model that shows where the individual groups were, and it really was by our observation as the consultants, really working with the groups and looking at them to determine where they were and how they were moving, and how did that manifest itself. As I said, the simple example of everybody came together, just assumed that they knew what the other was doing, and quickly realizing that they didn't, and so they started wanting to learn from one another.
Okay, another question here. Can you talk about why and how you interviewed people to select them for the affinity groups? Why not populate them with volunteers?
We did not interview. We did not select people to participate. It was all self-managed. The way that we did that, and this is an interesting question, because an easy thing would have been to do what they do with federal work groups, stand up the people that we assume are the experts and bring them together. What we did when the champion was identified, that person was identified as someone who was either had as their specific job responsibility that subject matter area, or who was a known advocate for that area. but the membership was all volunteer. Notices were sent out. If there's someone, for example, who is in palliative care, that's a very, small group, he knew other people who shared that interest. So we invited an initial set to the first meeting, and then we said, please invite others. So it was all voluntary. Nothing was assigned. The champions, while they were requested, they were not forced to take on the role. So it was all voluntary. And that is a strength of the groups, because people were there because they wanted to be, not because they had to be.
Thank you. Another question here. You mentioned some of the groups had low leadership team engagement and were therefore less successful. Were there any instances where groups were able to get leaders more engaged or overcome some of the challenges despite leadership challenges?
Yeah, I didn't say that they were, because leadership wasn't involved, they weren't successful. What we noticed was the more engaged leadership was, the higher participation and collaboration was. And so we had, people are human, and if I'm in a group and I'm a regular rank and file, to use federal parlance, I'm a GS 12, sort of mid-career, and I don't have much interaction with my senior executive, and suddenly I'm sitting at a table with them, and not only are they sitting there with me, they're asking me my opinion. And that's what happened in the groups. That is what helped spur people to want to come back, because they were being recognized that they had something to offer. We would regularly report to the administrator's office about the activity, and an example of what they did, and we didn't do it, but they wrote into their executive annual performance plans that they must support this work. So, if I have this written and it's going to be one of my success indicators for my annual evaluation, I'm going to pay attention to it. And that wasn't for coercion's sake, but it really was to say, this is important work for the agency, and we want you to be aware of it and encourage people that if they choose to, they can participate.
Another question here about the size of the affinity groups. What was the largest and what was the smallest? And do you have any guidelines on the size to help facilitate communications?
No guidelines. I really believe that to have as many voices in the room as possible. I've done a lot of large group work, and so to me, it's not an issue. Another point I didn't bring up, and I started to develop a slide about improbable pairings, but it just wasn't working out for today. But not only do we have people in a conference room, we have people all over the country calling into these meetings. So much of our facilitation was done virtually. We've had as high as 30 or 40 people in a meeting, and we've had as few as 4 or 5. Because I was doing this work and I was training the team that was working with me as well, size just was never an issue, and it always was. The people there, the people that are there are the right people to be there at the time. So yeah, I would say if you're just learning or you're just wanting to do group work, 12 to 15 people. That seems a reasonable thing that people can pretty much handle. And these meetings were being facilitated by the CMS subject matter experts. So they were not professional facilitators at all. We were there to help them if they needed it. But doing very seemingly simple things like having an agenda really goes a long way in helping someone who doesn't generally do this. And we intentionally designed our agenda taking into account people's learning styles. So we wanted to make sure that the agendas included pragmatic things that those that just wanted to take action, can do. We included, we talked on almost every agenda, we talked about past successes or past activities for those people that wanted to be more reflective. And for those people that were real blue sky visionary folks, we always had part of the agenda that talked about our vision for the future, our possibilities.
One more question here. How did you work in the professional development into the affinity group work? How much of affinity group meetings would be devoted to learning about group dynamics, for example?
Okay, so the professional development work was for the MITRE team, not the government. And the way I did that is I had, the way I ran our team was we met every Monday morning, and that was more of an operational meeting, talking about, you know, what the week work looked like, how we could, you know, cross-pollinate, do people need support or help. And then every other Thursday we met for pure professional development. So that's when we would actually do skill building. Either I would do it on a topic, or one of our team members who had created an innovative way of doing something, or done a special study or something like that. So we intentionally scheduled it every other week. The way we did development for CMS is we had a quarterly meeting where the senior executives at CMS would meet with the champions and with the MITRE team, and they could talk about what they were doing. And then we would inject professional development, only a very small part of it, into that discussion, and that was done on a quarterly basis.
Loretta, could you just clarify, when you were talking about interviews, that was in reference to the inquiry and not selection for the groups, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm sorry, when I talk about an inquiry, it's done, I interject. I don't start any work or project without doing some form of inquiry. So when, so they decide they want to have a population health group, a person is identified to be the champion, then we meet with that person initially and do an interview with them about what their vision for the group is. We would then build on that to help co-create the group. I would also then check in with them once or twice a year, just reconfirming where they are. But we would do that. We also, in some of the groups, did a brief inquiry when we launched the group. So we had people turn to one another and ask questions, or we would ask a question, the champion would ask a question. We wanted people to be able to be heard as much as possible, and we wanted to have all of the ideas out there. So it took varying forms.
Any other questions out there for Loretta? Doesn't seem like it. Earl, did you want to sign us off and do a summary?
Sure, it would be my pleasure. As we, seen today from Loretta's presentation, it's very informative in developing relationships, getting to know people, and people get to understand where one another are coming from, and developing partnership, not adversarial perspectives, but strength-based approaches that, where we don't necessarily ignore weaknesses, but we know that the strength-based positions will help make those weaknesses irrelevant. And we saw today where we see life application examples of how that can work in an organization, and one that is as delicate and as granular as healthcare. As I mentioned earlier, that you may not be in the healthcare field, but you can take a lot of this information and you can apply it to a lot of areas, and definitely go to work right away with some of these excellent examples of how to work with people to strive for a common goal. I've always said that organizational development is the hub and the spoke and wheel that helps our organizations roll forward. And again, that has just been proven here today. And thank you so much, Loretta, for sharing with us, putting together a presentation. And all I can say is be on the lookout for more webinars coming down the road. from the MOD MPOD alumni group. If anyone has any ideas or suggestions, please feel free to reach out to us. We're obviously on the CASE website. Look for emails to come that have additional information on things that the alumni group are up to. And thank you so much for your participation. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Earl. Take care, everyone.